go. On digital, online, smartphone and tablet. 5 Live Drive with Tony Lipsey and Sarah Brett.
It's a busy day on Drive today. Coming up, how are other airports viewing the Cabinet's approval today of a third runway at Heathrow? We'll find out shortly. Also, the editor of the Yorkshire Evening Post will give us his take on the Northern Trains fiasco.
Plus, as prices soar at the pumps, what is the best way to maximise those all-important miles per gallon? I think driving in neutral has been ruled out.
Yes.
Or, yeah, go down hills in neutral.
I'm being told off on several fronts on that. We'll talk about that later. Also... Well, there we are. That's just a couple of songs to have been performed at the Maida Vale studios, but they're now set to close after 84 years. We'll talk to one of its former sound engineers and hopefully enjoy the memories too. Right, 6 minutes past 5 then. Our top story this afternoon, controversial plans for a third runway at Heathrow have been approved by ministers. The scheme will be entirely funded by private investment and includes £2.6 billion in compensation for residents as well as noise abatement measures.
It's an issue that's been debated for nearly 20 years. Now MPs will be asked to vote on the expansion plans in the coming weeks. Transport Secretary Chris Grayling says the time for action is now, calling it an historic moment.
Despite being the busiest two-runway airport in the world, Heathrow's capacity constraints means it is falling behind its global competitors, impacting the UK's economy and global trading opportunities. Expansion at Heathrow will bring real benefits across the country, including a boost of up to £74 billion to passengers and the wider economy.
It's not entirely a done deal, though. The government's expected to face tough opposition on its own benches and from across the floor of the Commons. There'll be a vote in July with several Conservatives, including the former Transport Secretary Justin Greening, expected to rebel.
Environmental campaigners are also threatening to challenge the move in the courts. The Green Party leader, Caroline Lucas, told the Commons it just wasn't wanted.
There is no scenario in which expansion at Heathrow is compatible with meeting the government's own commitments under the Climate Change Act to limit air passenger growth to 60% by 2050. And those same projections imply that if this runway is approved, aviation will take up over half of the UK's entire carbon budget by 2050, which is absurd.
Well, Andrew Teacher is from Blackstock, a communications consultancy, and used to be a spokesman for Heathrow Airport. Andrew, hello to you.
Hi there.
And Kate Hewitt's with us, Deputy Director of the Aviation Environment Federation. Hello, Kate.
Hi there.
So let's look at the pros and cons then. Andrew, you're broadly for the expansion. What is it that appeals to you?
Well, I think we have to look at everything in the round, and if you look at all of the transport chaos that we've been seeing this week, look at the ongoing housing crisis, the ongoing obesity crisis, and everything connected with the NHS, all of these crises are to do with a failure to invest for the long term, and that's really what we've seen very much with the airport over the last 20 years, where it's gone from pillar to post. It's been used as a political football by successive governments, and we're in a space where everybody recognises the benefit of having economic growth on our doorstep. Everyone recognises the benefit of a hub airport, but we're still going round the houses with people spreading misinformation and generally thinking only about the kind of NIMBY brigade that often is what scuppers progress and scuppers development.
It's not exactly been that diametrically opposed argument to invest or otherwise, is it? Because the counter argument in a lot of cases
we haven't invested, have we?
No, but the counter argument has been where to do it rather than whether. I mean, I know Greenpeace and the Green Party would talk about environment issues, and Kate will in a second, but arguably a lot of people have been arguing for Gatwick, haven't they? It isn't just a matter of not investing; it's where to invest.
Well, it has been, because, I mean, but that's what I mean, but it has been pillar and post, because it's been a case of, at one point, let's expand Birmingham, let's expand this, let's expand that, and just as Justine Greening, the former Transport Secretary, interviewed on Radio 4 this morning, was trying to present the fact that we don't need a hub airport anymore, we just need point-to-point travel. The value of Heathrow is in that hub. Let me just explain what it is, because I'm aware that that's gobbledygook to most people. Now, a hub is where you have the big heavy duty flights that go to places like Asia and New York, and they're made possible by having lots of feeder planes that go to closer, smaller destinations, and only by the economies of scale of having all of that in one place can you make the frequency of travel that an airport like Heathrow offers.
Yeah.
That's the way you make that viable, and that can only be done when you've got enough stuff happening in one place.
Yeah, okay, and to be fair on that, Kate, I'll bring you in now. The Regional and Business Airports Group, that represents 32 airports or so around the UK, have been crying out for this, saying, look, we've got lots of demand to get to Heathrow, we just need more slots. So that's a case for the expansion.
Yeah. Yes, and it's very curious. It feels like a very curious situation to us that is the case, that many of the regional airports are coming out in support. I mean, what seems to have been happening is that Heathrow Airport has been going out individually to each of these airports saying, look, if we have some more capacity, there are bound to be some more slots available for domestic routes. And so each of those airports individually are hoping, presumably, that they're going to be, the one that will get these few extra slots. I mean, the reality is that, the government's own evidence suggests that if you expand Heathrow, growth at almost every other UK airport will be lower than if you did not expand Heathrow. So almost all of them, in fact, will lose out in terms of passenger traffic, and there is really nothing that the government can do to ensure that a certain proportion or number of the new kind of slots that will be available to fly to and from Heathrow go to domestic destinations. I mean, the slots will go to where the market determines.
Well, yeah,
I'm afraid it's just not true. The government has the full ability to be able to designate a certain number of slots, and from a point of view of the business case for major airlines like British Airways that have obviously flights that go all around the world, those are only viable if they can fill them up, and the reality is that in order to fill up flights multiple times a day that go to New York and Asia and beyond, the big carriers have to be able to feed those, and other routes across the UK to Scotland, to Manchester, etc., that they all have a role to play in that, and it's not simply a case of expand Heathrow and kill everything else. It's just not.
Okay,
it's not true.
And Kate, on a more broader economic picture, we're led to believe there'll be 60,000 new jobs, £70 billion in economic benefits by the 2050s. So, I mean, would you have supported the expansion elsewhere, Kate, or are you just against general airport expansion on environment grounds?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what the impact of this thing will be, Heathrow's responsible for more CO2 from flying than any other airport in the world. It's already a massively polluting airport. It's sitting in a part of London that regularly breaches legal limits on air pollution. We can't see this being the right investment. And no, I mean, it's not simply a question we think of shifting it to another airport in the southeast. You're going to have problems in terms of the climate change impacts wherever you go. I mean, in terms of the jobs argument, obviously jobs are important. No one who's currently employed at Heathrow is going to lose their job whatever happens, and I think that's an important thing to say, because I think some of the lobbyists have given false impressions on that in the past. But I mean, the government's actually often quite cagey in terms of jobs promises, because they recognise that if you expand Heathrow, you're not necessarily creating loads of new jobs. What you might well be doing is sucking people out of other parts of the UK in other bits of employment to get them to come and work in the southeast.
One of the other issues, Andrew, is locals. We're told there'll be around 800 houses demolished locally, and those backing onto that area of demolition won't receive any compensation. They may receive some fresh double glazing, but that'll be it. Chris in Richmond texts in, Andrew. I'll just put this to you now. Tony says, please do me a favour. Every time you get someone on to promote the Heathrow expansion, ask them where they live. I bet none of them live in West London. Andrew, roughly where do you live?
I live in Highbury, but in fairness to me, I'm a Spurs supporter living in earshot of the Arsenal Stadium, which I would argue is far, far worse than anybody.
But his point is well made, isn't it? Because even Vince Cable struggled to answer that question earlier today when he was asked if he was an MP for an area away from Heathrow, whether he would.
He's MP for Twickenham, of course.
Whether he would be as passionate.
Look, let's be honest. This isn't a political point, but Vince, Vince is a great guy, but he's not been particularly progressive when it comes to airports or housing. I think the reality is that in anything you build, whether it's a power station, whether it's social housing, whether it's an airport, whether it's a road, whether it's a school, anybody backing onto that is going to generally oppose it. Now, everyone comes out and says we want more social housing, we want more affordable housing, but offer to build it near them, and their mindset will very much change very quickly. And I think that's the reality of it. And anybody that says you're going to be able to please everybody with anything you build is mistaken. And unfortunately, there's always going to be people whose noses are put out of joint for whatever reason, through any kind of development. That's regrettable, but it's a matter of fact. And I think there has to be a decision which elected politicians make as to where does the greater benefit lie. And I think ultimately, if we don't do something because there's a small minority of people that will be adversely affected, that's where we end up in situations where we don't build airports, where we don't build housing, where we don't build schools. And I think you can kind of keep going around. There'll always be someone that texts in and says I'm affected, and that is regrettable for them. I'm very sorry for Chris in Richmond, but the reality of it is that the benefits will outweigh those negatives.
Well, Kate, what do you make of that? In essence, it's kind of ruthless, but it's progress.
Yeah, well, look, Heathrow today affects more people with noise than the 5 leading competitors to Heathrow in Europe combined. You know, it's a big number of people. I think it's wrong to characterise it as a handful of people complaining. I think that there are people who've, bought the houses, moved into an area.
Hang on, Andrew.
Can I just finish?
Yeah, go on, Kate.
My point. Can I just finish my point? That there are lots of people who've moved into the Heathrow area a number of years ago on the back of promises that the government made that the third runway would not go ahead. I mean, David Cameron was absolutely unequivocal about this in the past, and I think it's unfair to then expect those people to just lie down and say, okay, that's fine. Well, we'll accept all this extra noise and all the extra flight paths that you're imposing on us.
Just to put some context on those who are having their houses demolished, they'll get 125% of the value of the home plus their legal fees and stamp duty paid.
Most of the people that lived there, the airport was there before those people moved there. So I think this concept that people moved there and suddenly this airport popped up overnight is slightly ridiculous.
No, that's not at all what I said. I said that there have been commitments. No, I didn't.
Made the decision, which is simply untrue.
All right, Andrew, just Kate, final word to you. We've got 20 seconds.
Right, Kate. But okay. Oh my goodness, what am I going to say in 20
Well,
seconds?
it was just giving you a chance to finish that point.
We need to recognise that. Okay, sure. Noise has a very real impact on people's lives. It's not just about annoyance, it impacts people's health. There are risks to cardiovascular risks to people who are woken up at night, and I don't think we can simply brush those concerns off alongside all the wider environmental impacts that we're talking about.
Kate, thank you. Kate Hewitt there, Deputy Director of the Aviation Environment Federation. Andrew Teacher used to be a spokesman for Heathrow Airport. We'll hear from Vince Cable. We mentioned him a moment ago. We'll hear from him after 6, as well as Louise Ellman, who's the Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside, but she formerly chaired the Transport Select Committee, so we'll talk to them about their views shortly. It's 18 minutes past 5.
This is 5 Live Drive.